There are moments in life when the warrior soul whispers its difference. An inner voice, a deep instinct echoes, revealing a unique code of honor, a personal way of seeing the world that you may never have been able to explain. It's not a choice, but an initiation. It's as if you see reality through the lens of the king, finding meaning in silence and depth in what seems banal to others. While the world ignores subtle details, the rituals of life, you feel them in every fiber of your being. Silence for you resonates more powerfully than any war cry. You perceive the hidden wound behind a smile, feel the sorrow of others as an echo in your own warrior heart. Even when no words are spoken, you didn't ask to be this way, you simply are. Robert Moore reminds us that warrior souls are forged in the silent fire of initiation, and perhaps this explains the feeling of not belonging, as if your soul came from a distant time and place, from an ancestral tribe. While the outside world, called with its noise, with its false gods, you turned to the inner sanctuary, to the warrior's cave. While others sought answers externally, you explored the universe of the soul, the territory of the wild. And this inner dive came at a price, a profound, often painful loneliness, not from being alone, but from feeling that no one truly understood your way of feeling, being, warring. But this sensitivity, this emotional depth, this visceral connection to life is not weakness. It's not something to be hidden or fixed. It's a sign, a reminder of the extraordinary warrior soul that resides within you, a soul that perceives beyond the veil of appearances, that knows without being told, that captures the invisible energies of life, that feels what others refuse to acknowledge. You carry an ancestral truth, a silent wisdom that burns in your chest like sacred fire, even if you don't yet know how to express it in words, in your own rituals. If you've ever felt too much for the world, too emotional, too intense, too reflective, it's not because there's something wrong with you. It's because the world hasn't yet learned to embrace the depth of warrior souls like yours. Listen carefully. You are not broken. You are not lost. You are awake. Awake in a world that still sleeps deeply, that has yet to begin its journey. And when a warrior soul awakens, everything around it begins to transform, however slowly. Having a sensitive soul, a warrior soul, means that everything touches you more deeply, not out of fragility, but because your sensitivity, your warrior intuition allows you to see beyond the surface. You not only hear the words, but feel the energy, the sadness, the longing behind them. The pain of another doesn't just pass through you, but resides in your warrior heart as if it were your own. You silently carry burdens that others fear to name. The world may tell you that you are too much, that you need to harden, to stop thinking and feeling so deeply. But what the world doesn't understand is that you cannot and should not live any other way. This intensity, this way of being, is not a curse, but a blessing, a disguised call to the hero's journey. Robert Moore teaches us that to find the light, the inner king, we must confront our shadow, the magician. And you, with all your depth and complexity, have faced inner storms, epic battles that others can barely imagine. You have sat in silence in your inner cave, questioning your purpose, feeling the emptiness that sometimes clutches at your chest, repeatedly asking, what is the meaning of all this? What is my mission? And yet, you are here, seeking, questioning, feeling. This inner voice is your warrior soul, a voice that many stifle with noise, distractions, and pretense. But you have learned to inhabit your silence even when it hurts. You have learned that wounds do not need to be denied, but honored, integrated into your journey. That pain does not distance you from who you are, but reconnects you with your warrior essence. Your soul is special because it chose to feel, chose not to numb itself, chose to awaken, to begin its journey. And this awakening, though painful and lonely at times, is also a sacred path, the hero's journey. In a world obsessed with escaping inner truths, you chose to go deeper, to confront your shadow. While others incessantly seek answers in the outside world, in false gods, you closed your eyes and began to ask the questions only the warrior soul can answer. Who am I? Why am I here? What is my purpose? What does it mean to live with integrity? You may not have all the... There are still no answers, but the simple act of asking these questions already makes you different, already sets you on the journey. This doesn't mean you're lost, but that you're finding your way back to your truth, to your inner king. A sensitive soul, a warrior soul, isn't defined by what it achieves, but by what it transforms. Every time you chose forgiveness over resentment, every time you allowed yourself to cry when the world told you to be strong, every time you opened your heart, your warrior soul knowing it could get hurt, you were embodying your true power, the power of the king. Your soul doesn't need applause or validation. It vibrates at a different frequency, the frequency of the warrior. And though this frequency may sometimes feel isolating, it is never wrong. In fact, it's exactly what this world needs. Even if you felt out of place, the truth is you're beginning to fit in, within yourself, on your own journey. You weren't born to fit into the world, but to awaken, to transform, to begin your journey, to remind others of the parts of themselves, of their inner warriors that they've forgotten. Robert Moore reminds us that an unlived life is a disease from which one can die. And you, even if you've hidden, even if you've been silent, know that there is still a life, a journey within you waiting to be lived, a warrior flame that hasn't been extinguished, a light that no matter how wounded refuses to be put out. Your soul isn't special just because it feels different, but because it carries a mission, the warrior's call, a mission that often transcends words, logic, and what the eyes can see. And this mission isn't always grand or loud. Sometimes it's as quiet as choosing love in a moment of anger, as simple as telling the truth when it's easier to stay silent, as beautiful as seeing someone for who they truly are, for their inner warrior, when no one else does. Sometimes it's in the subtlest details, in the way you quietly accompany someone, in how you listen without judgment, in how you give space to those who have forgotten how to sustain themselves, how to honor their inner warrior. May your true essence, your inner warrior, shine. Perhaps no one has ever applauded you for it. Perhaps you've never received recognition, praise, or a simple thank you. But your warrior soul doesn't need applause. It doesn't seek validation, but truth, the warrior's path. Because when you have a different kind of soul, a warrior soul, you can't follow the paths others have trod. You tire of the noise of superficiality, of trying to fit into molds that were never made for you. You're not drawn to empty gestures or superficial approval. There's something within you that has always sought more, something more authentic, more profound, more deeply yours, more connected with your inner warrior. And this search hasn't always been easy, because the more awakened you become, the more aware you are of how asleep the world truly is. You begin to see the contradictions hidden in everyday life, the pain disguised as success, the fear disguised as ambition, the disconnection passed off as normalcy. But you can't pretend you tried. You tried to adapt, to fit in, to do what was expected, and still, something always felt wrong. There was a silent discomfort, a quiet emptiness, a persistent voice, the call of your inner warrior whispering, "This isn't your place." That feeling the feeling of not belonging, of not fitting in, may have seemed at some point a sign of fragility. But in truth, warrior, it was your intuition, the voice of your warrior soul echoing within you, a gentle call, a call to adventure, to return to yourself, to your true essence, to that immaculate part that never surrendered to the shadow, to the magician that never allowed your inner light, the king's light, to be completely extinguished. And it was there, in that space of discomfort, on that threshold of not knowing, that your true transformation, your hero's journey, began to blossom. For special souls, warrior souls, are not polished in moments of comfort and superficiality. They are forged in the crucible of experience, in the heart of initiation, in the chaos of the psyche, in the pain that, as Robert Moore teaches, impels the inner warrior to plunge into the depths of their own being, confronting the shadow. And when you began this inner journey, something changed profoundly within you, a change aligned with the archetypes, as Robert Moore explores. You stopped seeking answers outside yourself, in the distorted mirrors of the external world. In what Robert Moore would call ego inflation, you no longer needed the validation of others to acknowledge the truth of your feelings, for connection with the self, as Robert Moore describes, is the source of true validation. You've begun to become your own sanctuary, your own guide, your own inextinguishable flame, integrating the magician and the lover, according to Robert Moore. And in this sacred space, you've discovered something profoundly powerful, echoing Robert Moore's teachings. What once hurt you began to reveal the warrior's path. What once separated you began to weave threads of connection nurtured by the lover. What once confused you began to unveil the truth that always resided in your heart, guided by the wisdom of the king, as Robert Moore reminds us. Because a soul that learns to inhabit itself, confronting its shadows and integrating its archetypes, as Robert Moore describes, is a soul that no longer fears its own brilliance. And it's in this moment of integration, of union with the self, as Robert Moore describes, that everything begins to acquire new meaning, a new depth. It no longer hurts to be different, singular, unique, for individuality is the expression of the integrated soul, as Robert Moore states. You begin to honor your individuality, to embrace your authenticity, to manifest the strength of the warrior and the compassion of the lover, as Robert Moore inspires us. You understand that you weren't born to dissolve into the crowd, but to expand, to flourish in all your fullness, integrating all your archetypes according to Robert Moore. You weren't born to follow in other people's footsteps, but to forge your own path, to create your own dance, to walk where there were no footprints before, guided by your own inner king, as Robert Moore describes. You no longer need everyone's understanding, and instead attract those who can see your essence, not with physical eyes, but with the vision of the soul, with the perception of the archetypes, as Robert Moore teaches us. For true connection, as Robert Moore describes, is not based on ephemeral appearances, but on the resonance of similar frequencies, on the harmony of archetypes. And when you raise your frequency, tuning in with your archetypes, as Robert Moore indicates, everything around you begins to transform. This is one of the greatest gifts of a special soul, as Robert Moore defines it. She awakens others simply by existing, by emanating her light, by expressing the fullness of her archetypes. You don't need to accomplish great feats or make a fuss to touch the world. The integration of your archetypes is enough, as Robert Moore teaches. Sometimes, just by the way you look, the way you listen, the way you simply are connected to your archetypes, as Robert Moore describes, you illuminate places that once only knew shadow. And not everyone can do that, my dear. To reach this point, you had to go through moments of profound pain, fragmentation, encounters with the shadow, as Robert Moore explains. You had to confront the questions that others were afraid to utter aloud, the questions that echo in the archetypes, as Robert Moore explores. And you chose not to fixate on your wound. You chose to traverse it, to transform it into wisdom, into compassion, into a serene strength that doesn't shout, but stands firm, rooted in your truth, in the truth of your archetypes, as Robert Moore shows us. People who have traversed their own personal hell consciously, confronting their shadows, as Robert Moore describes, are those who then walk with the greatest humility. They no longer need to prove anything to anyone. They don't impose themselves, because they know themselves. They know their archetypes, as Robert Moore explains. And this truth, even unspoken, is profoundly felt by those who approach. Your soul is special because it doesn't settle for mere survival. It yearns to live fully, deeply, and truly, with purpose and meaning, integrating all its archetypes, as Robert Moore inspires us. And that's why everything that isn't authentic becomes unbearable. Empty conversations, superficial connections, goals imposed by the outside world. They no longer fit in your journey, not because you consider yourself superior, but because you've learned to honor your energy, to preserve your integrity, to nurture your archetypes, as Robert Moore teaches us. And when you allow yourself to be, without filters, without masks, aligned with your archetypes, as Robert Moore describes, life begins to respond differently. You stop chasing, seeking approval. You simply attract what vibrates with your essence, with the frequency of your archetypes, as Robert Moore affirms. And you let go, without fear, of what you once tried so hard to retain. Because now you know that nothing that is real is forced, and nothing that belongs to you can be lost. At this point in your journey, you are not seeking to belong to a group, to a tribe. You seek truth, presence, inner peace, the integration of your archetypes, as Robert Moore guides us. And in this process, something subtle yet profound begins to awaken within you, a connection with the self, as Robert Moore describes. You reconcile with your past, not by denying it, but by recognizing it as the sacred ground that prepared you for awakening, for the integration of archetypes, as Robert Moore teaches. You forgive what once hurt you, not pretending it didn't matter, but understanding it deeply, as a necessary step on the warrior's journey, as Robert Moore describes. Looking through the lens of compassion, the lover's compassion, as Robert Moore reminds us, you begin to feel gratitude, not just for the good things, but for everything that made you stronger, wiser, more human, more integrated with your archetypes. Your soul is special, truly and deeply special, because it chose to awaken in a world that often prefers to remain asleep, a world that often rejects the journey of the archetypes, as Robert Moore explains. It didn't settle for the superficial, but was drawn, almost instinctively, to the essential, to the truth of the archetypes, as Robert Moore describes. And yes, perhaps this has caused you to feel lonely many times, but that loneliness was never a punishment, dear one. It was a preparation, a sacred space of silence, so you could finally hear what no one else could teach you. Your own inner voice, the voice of the self, as Robert Moore reminds us. Now you understand that everything you felt wasn't an overreaction. It was sensitivity, a sensitivity guided by the archetypes, as Robert Moore explains. Your intensity wasn't a burden, but a compass guiding you along paths others couldn't see. The paths of individuation, as Robert Moore describes. The way you love deeply, differently, isn't a flaw. It's precisely the kind of love this world desperately needs, the love born from the integration of archetypes, as Robert Moore shows us. So, don't change. Don't dim your light, the light of your archetypes, as Robert Moore inspires us. Don't hide. This world already has many copies, but your soul, with its unique archetypes, as Robert Moore describes, is unique. When the soul truly awakens, as Robert Moore describes, it doesn't happen in an explosion of fireworks. It's not a sudden flash of illumination or a dramatic epiphany. No, it's a silent, intimate process, almost invisible from the outside, but on the inside, it's fiercely transformative. A process of integrating the archetypes. It's as if the broken, forgotten, or dormant pieces of you slowly begin to find each other again, guided by the archetypes, as Robert Moore explains. As if something you've been waiting for perhaps your whole life finally begins to align with the archetypes, as Robert Moore describes. And in that moment, you realize you can no longer live the same way. You can no longer engage in superficial conversations, remain in jobs that dull your spirit, maintain connections that survive only out of habit. Your soul becomes more selective, not out of arrogance, but out of a genuine need to protect its energy, to honor its archetypes, as Robert Moore teaches us. You begin to realize you're not here to be drained, but to be expressed, to blossom deeply without apology, to manifest the fullness of your archetypes, as Robert Moore states. Often, the most special souls are those who have endured the greatest trials on the journey of the archetypes, as Robert Moore describes, not because they deserved it, but because they needed to traverse the darkness to remember who they truly are, to integrate their archetypes, as Robert Moore explains. Some truths only reveal themselves in darkness. Some understandings are only born when the world you knew crumbles, because it's in that moment, when there's nothing left to hold on to, that you finally discover you were what you were looking for all along, that the integration of your archetypes, as Robert Moore describes, was the key. Everything you longed for was already inside you, waiting patiently to be seen. You begin to see life with new eyes, with the eyes of the archetypes. As Robert Moore shows us, what once seemed chaos now seems movement, necessary, purposeful. What once seemed loss now seems liberation. You begin to trust the process, even if you don't fully understand it. You learn to stop chasing what pulls away, to stop begging for what doesn't flow. There's a silent wisdom within you that begins to guide your steps, the wisdom of the archetypes, as Robert Moore describes. And even when certainty is absent, your soul knows, and that is enough. The modern world often demands you be logical, productive, predictable, but your soul doesn't move in straight lines or follow clocks. It breathes in cycles, the cycles of the archetypes, as Robert Moore explains. It dances in spirals. It speaks in symbols, the symbols of the archetypes, as Robert Moore describes, and it expresses itself through intuition, the intuition that connects with the archetypes, as Robert Moore shows us. When you stop resisting your nature, the nature of your archetypes, as Robert Moore affirms, everything becomes clearer, not easier but more real. In time, you realize true fulfillment doesn't come from meeting the world's expectations. It comes from being radically true to what your inner self whispers to you in silence, to what your archetypes whisper, as Robert Moore inspires us. And that whisper, though invisible to others, transforms everything. It changes how you walk through life, how you relate to your archetypes, as Robert Moore describes. You choose the way you create, the way you love. Your warrior soul didn't come here to be understood by everyone. It came to remind you that you don't need the world's approval to be fully, completely yourself. The most powerful transformation of having a warrior soul isn't what you achieve externally matters less than what blossoms within, in your warrior soul, in your inner king. A time comes when you realize, with your soul, that true initiation isn't measured by applause, titles, or recognition, but by the quality of your presence with yourself, how you nourish yourself in silence when no one is listening, how you support yourself with your own strength, your inner warrior, when no one is holding you up, how you honor your inner truth, your inner king, even if it means disappointing those around you. This deep fidelity to yourself, to your center, doesn't arise suddenly. It germinates slowly, after countless stumbles on the hero's journey, after numerous moments when you abandoned yourself, weakened yourself, to be accepted, to fit in, to cling to the illusion of safety, of the familiar. But a soul connected to the archetypal masculine energy, as Robert Moore teaches us, can't stray from itself for long. It may try to distract itself. It may even lose itself for years in the superficiality of the world, in the shadows of the victim. However, inevitably, the moment arrives when the warrior soul whispers, "Enough lies." And when this sacred moment, this call to initiation happens, everything transforms. You stop pursuing what once fascinated you, what imprisoned you in the pure eternus. You understand that many of your goals weren't your own, imposed by the manipulative magician, that many of your achievements were merely disguises, defenses of the victim, that many of your relationships were illusory refuges, bonds of pure dependence, preventing you from finding yourself, from accessing your king. And yes, initially it hurts. Everything you built on a borrowed identity, a fragile persona, begins to crumble. You feel empty, lost, confused, like a hero in the belly of the whale. But within this silence of deconstruction, a light, the spark of the king, ignites. A delicate spark, almost imperceptible, but so alive, so potent, that you can't ignore it. It's your warrior soul, as Robert Moore would say, reminding you of who you are, of your heroic potential. And from this deep place, this sacred space within you, your center, you begin to rebuild yourself, not as before to please or impress, trapped in the magician's web, but to simply be. To be yourself with all your nuances, your shadows and your light, your contradictions and your unique truth, the strength of your king and the compassion of the lover. As you walk this return to yourself, this rescue of the inner king, something profound alters in your relationship with the world. You cease seeking external approval and find the peace of self-knowledge, of integration, as Robert Moore inspires us to do. From this inner serenity, this strength of the king, you live with more authenticity. You become more conscious of what you consume, more attentive to what you express, more careful with whom you share your vital energy, with the energies that surround you. You learn to set boundaries, not out of rejection, but out of self-love, through the strength of your inner warrior. You discover that solitude isn't the punishment you once feared, but a sanctuary where your warrior soul strengthens, where your creativity blossoms, where your intuition, the wisdom of your king, sharpens. Because when you learn to be with yourself in silence, as Robert Moore shows us, everything transforms. You no longer fear emptiness, the descent into the unconscious. You no longer tolerate crumbs of affection, disguised as love, the magician's manipulations. You no longer seek external validation to feel worthy, the victim's affirmation. And from this new way of inhabiting yourself, this integration of the king, you build a different life, a more authentic one. Your decisions are no longer driven by external pressures, by the shadows of the victim, but by an internal compass, silent and true, the wisdom of your king. You feel what resonates with your essence and what doesn't. You don't need logical justifications. You feel it in your body, in your energy, in your warrior soul, guided by Robert Moore's wisdom. And though this may cause misunderstanding, it liberates you, free from conditioning, from the bonds of the pure, free from the expectations of others, free to live from a place of truth, from the strength of your king. And in this state of presence, everything begins to align, not because life becomes perfect, but because you no longer need it to be. You have learned that even chaos has its beauty, that even loss brings hidden gifts, that every experience, even the most painful, is a teacher that leads you back to your center, as Robert Moore reminds us. As you advance on this path of reconnection, of initiation, your priorities transform naturally, authentically. Your life is no longer shaped by what the world expects of you, by imposed expectations, but by what your warrior soul yearns to express, by the strength of your king. What once seemed urgent now dissolves. The worries that kept you awake at night lose their importance, not out of indifference, but because you understood that much of your suffering came from trying to control the uncontrollable, from the helplessness of the victim. Now, from an inner clarity, from the strength of your king, you are free. Free from the desperate need to have all the answers, from the victim's fear, from fixing everything, from the magician's illusion of control, from carrying burdens that never belong to you. Then arises a feeling of lightness, not because life has become easier, but because you no longer try to control everything, driven by fear or the exhausting desire to please, trapped in the magician's web and the fragility of the victim. You trust in divine timing, in the coming and going of things. You cease resisting change. You stop begging for attention. You stop trying to explain the inexplicable because you finally understood that you don't need to fight for what already belongs to you. Your peace, your truth, your path, as Robert Moore encourages us to find. And in this transformation, you experience time differently. You are no longer in a hurry. The Pure's anxiety calms down. You no longer chase a version of success that never belonged to you, a magician's illusion. You find beauty in simplicity, in moments of quietude, in the sacred pauses that life offers. What once seemed tedious now becomes your refuge, and what you sought outside, validation, affection, purpose, now emerges from within, from the strength of your king, from the fullness of your being, because you discovered that the more you surrender to yourself, to your center, the less you depend on a world that never knew how to give you what you truly needed. Over time, this connection with yourself deepens and manifests in everything you do, in your speech, in your walk, in your listening. It's not about having all the answers, as Robert Moore reminds us. Just being present is enough. Just seeing people as they are, without filters, without judgments. Your authenticity, the expression of your king, becomes your language and transforms every space you inhabit. Your presence makes an impact. Even in silence, your calm expresses more than any speech. Your ability to see the other without labeling them creates a space of relief. Not because you see yourself as superior, but because you have traversed the darkness without fleeing, without numbing yourself. You remained in it long enough to understand it, to learn from it, to return with the light. And this, as Robert Moore inspires us, is one of the most precious gifts. The ability to return from the abyss with a message. You chose to go through the pain, and therefore you can be beside the other without controlling them. You can understand without needing to be right. You can love without possessing. You can guide without manipulating. For you have learned to do this with yourself. You no longer try to save everyone. You no longer yearn to be seen. You simply walk in alignment with what you feel, with the strength of your inner king. And that is enough. Those who resonate draw closer. Those who don't resonate go their own way. And you are at peace with both because your goal is no longer to belong, but to be in harmony with yourself, as Robert Moore teaches us. It is then that you understand that your sensitivity was never weakness, but a misunderstood gift, that your search for depth was not a flaw but your warrior soul crying out for something more, that your discomfort with superficiality was not arrogance, but a sign that you were born to go beyond, to become the hero of your own journey. Your warrior soul yearns to be seen, to dance freely from the shadows of conformity. And yes, not everyone will understand this dance. Some will say you shine too brightly, that your light, the light of your king, is blinding. Others will whisper that you weave fantasies, that your truth is illusion. But you no longer need to justify the calling of your heart, the calling of your inner king. You have made peace with the unique melody that resonates within you, the melody of your warrior soul, and instead of silencing it, you nourish it with the strength and wisdom you find within yourself, guided by the teachings of Robert Moore. Warrior, listen to the drums beating in your chest, for in that rhythm lies your deepest essence. In it resides your warrior truth. In it pulses the power of the king within you. If these words resonate in your gut, if in the depths of your being you feel that you are not reading this by chance, then perhaps the time has come. The time to emerge from the shadows of inertia and reveal yourself completely. The time to honor your strength as vital energy, to embrace your individuality not as a burden, but as the precious royal gift that it truly is. The world doesn't need more imitations, more armor that imprisons the warrior spirit. It needs awakened men, kings who dare to reign in their fullness, like you. Robert Moore says that if this message has touched your soul, if it awakened an ancestral memory residing deep within, I invite you to walk this path of initiation and self-knowledge with us. Join us as we continue to explore these sacred realms where the archetypal masculine, soul, and consciousness intertwine, forging the sword of life.